Welcome back to NextDev.
All right. Yeah. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to NextDev, podcast where we dive into the journeys of notable figures in the tech space. Show for developers by developers. My name is Dan Guzman. I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan.
How we doing, y'all?
Hey. And today we have a very special guest, arguably one of the most important figures in shaping modern web development, I would argue. Max Stoiber.
That's a big intro. Holy smokes. Thank you for having me. Now I got to live up to that hype. I don't know I'm going to live up to that hype. Holy smokes.
All right. So, Max, why don't you give us a quick intro? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, well, I'm not a goose. That's for sure.
Okay.
Are we sure about that?
Yeah, pretty sure. I think so. I'm not so sure about Dan, though. He's a little bit suspicious, I must say. Like, if I was on the Goose investigation police, I think I'd take a good look at that guy.
Yeah.
Although rumor has it he's going to update his profile picture. I'm just joking. I'm Max. I'm a software engineer by trade. I've been a software engineer for many years. And what Dan was referring to is that I was really early in the React ecosystem. And so I ended up co-creating and maintaining a bunch of open source projects in the React and Node and general JavaScript TypeScript space. Most notably nowadays, probably styled components, which kind of redefined and reinvented how people style React applications. But before then, React Boilerplate, in the middle, Keystone.js, which was a Node.js CMS, a bunch of stuff. I have a page on my website that pulls data from GitHub. And I think at latest count, the open source projects that I've created have over 100,000 stars on GitHub in total, all combined. The open source projects that I maintained and created combined is over 200,000 stars, I believe. I haven't checked in a little bit, but it's a lot of stars. And it's a lot of people using them. And so that really was what kickstarted my career. And I have no idea where Ryan and Dan want to take this conversation, but that's really what kickstarted my career. And then I ended up getting into startups, built a startup called Spectrum that eventually got acquired by GitHub and turned into GitHub Discussions, if you ever use those. And then most recently, I founded a startup called Stellate over the last 4 years, where we built a GraphQL CDN that just 4 months ago got acquired by Shopify, which is now why I have a Shopify neon sign in my Zoom background, in case you're watching on video. And yeah, so now I'm at Shopify. I run a 70 people org here called Liquid Storefronts that is defining how millions of merchants build their online stores with Shopify, the templating language, the online store editor, that whole space, and it's been really fun. All right, that was a lengthy intro.
No, that was perfect. I think that was great. So, I think my brain is still catching up, even for my ADHD mind. That was a lot of content. So we're gonna go all the way back, and what got you? Well, let's see. How do we want to start this? Where are you calling from today? Where are you at? Where's your location? Drop the coordinates, and we'll meet you
SWAT
online.
team is
Right,
gonna knock on the door. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area now.
Nice. And what led you there?
Ooh, tech. I'm from Austria, Europe originally, born and raised, stayed there all my life, although I traveled a lot. And then when my co-founder and I were doing Stellate, we realized or we optimized our whole lives for the company, for making it a success. And so every single decision we made, we asked ourselves very intentionally, how can we make this the best possible chance for Stellate to succeed? And a part of that was, where do we live? And so we had this hypothesis that living in San Francisco would increase our chances, at least by a little bit. And even if it's a little bit, that's totally worth it. But we weren't sure if that was true. And so we booked an Airbnb and we actually stayed in San Francisco for 2 months, I think. And we said at the beginning, we're going to look back after 2 months of staying in San Francisco full time. And we're going to look back and see, have our chances of success as a company actually increased by any meaningful amount? We think. And if so, then it probably makes sense to move. And if not, then no. 2 days in, we looked at each other and we were like, shit, we have to be here. There's literally no choice. The density of people and talent and conversations that happen here just don't happen anywhere else. And so it was immediately obvious that we need to be here. And I love it here. It's a beautiful place to live, and the people have definitely delivered.
So you said 2 days in, you were like, all right, man, we're staying. What was there like one defining moment? Like, were you walking on the sidewalk and then like some VC walked up to you and said, I'm just going to write you a check for $8 million. Go ahead.
Not quite that, but it was something very similar where 2 days in, we got invited to a dinner at Gerald's place for people who know Gerald, and there were some. I won't name any specific names, but there were some very influential people there who ended up giving us really great feedback about some of the products and features that we were working on that actually changed the way we approached the whole problem space. And so if we hadn't been there, we wouldn't have been invited to this dinner, and we wouldn't have gotten that feedback, and we would have built something that actually would have gone in a completely wrong direction. That probably saved us a month or two alone. And that was just one conversation that literally happened on the second night that we were there. The first night also something awesome happened. I don't remember what it was. But it just became glaringly obvious that those kinds of conversations don't happen anywhere else. And so you have to be here.
Awesome. What's one cool thing you're working on right now in your days at Shopify?
I have to now you're putting me in a tricky position, because now I have to talk about the things we do. And I don't know how much I can share, but there's some very exciting things happening.
Oh.
Don't cancel yourself.
I'm not going to cancel myself. I'm also not going to risk my job. But if you think about it, Liquid Storefronts is the way a lot of our merchants build their online stores. There's a contingent that builds them with React, but a lot of our merchants are like pottery store owners, or yoga studios or whatever other merchants you have. And so, or apparently VHS mold removal people. And so those sorts of people don't know React, right? They just want to go to Shopify and they want to build an online store. And so we have a visual editor that is powered by a templating language called Liquid that Toby, our CEO, invented about 20 years ago. And so I own that whole area of how do these merchants actually build their online store. And so we're working on a bunch of development tools, dev tools improvements. We're working on a bunch of improvements to the online store editor, the sort of visual drag and drop thing. And then we're also working on some improvements to our themes, which is the thing you can use to actually build your online store. There's a lot of exciting stuff happening for Shopify people. Stay tuned for the next edition. There's going to be some good things coming out. I can't talk about it much more than that, but it's a very exciting space and it's a really fun team. And so I've been here 4 months and I love it.
Exclusive on NextDev. We're going to be launching the next gen of Shopify.
Yep.
Right.
There you go.
That's awesome. You have quite a journey, Max, getting into this space, starting in open source software. I want to unpack all of it starting from the very beginning. How did you get into software development?
I started in software really in high school I started playing video games very early on like the original Game Boys, and then later on transitioned to my laptop, and my parents bought me this very shitty laptop, and I ended up playing all kinds of games like Minecraft and League of Legends and whatever. And eventually a bunch of me and my friends wanted to play Minecraft together, and so I ended up having to set up a server, which even nowadays, I don't know when the last time was that you tried to set up a Minecraft server, but it's kind of painful. Still kind of painful. I don't understand how there's not just a single. Why is there no Vercel for Minecraft hosting? You know what I mean? Like, why doesn't that exist? There's a free bootstrap startup idea for you right there. Vercel for Minecraft.
I'm gonna write that down.
Lots of people play Minecraft. Lots of people try to make servers to play with their friends. Yep. And then the other thing is you have to pay for the server whether you use it or not, but they're serverless now. So really, if you can actually reinvent the billing model for Minecraft servers where you only pay for them if you actually use them. Because I have nothing running on there that needs to be running 24/7. I'm literally paying for a Minecraft server right now for our kids that's just running, and they play like half an hour a day. And I pay for it 24/7. Why? You don't have to do that. You know what I mean? You can just use something like FlyIO machines or something and run a Minecraft server that turns off when it's not used. But anyways, I'm going on a completely arbitrary ramble. Back then, even now, it's easier than it was back then. Back then, you have to like manually download this like Minecraft server jar Java thing and then run it on the server and do all that stuff. And so I had to figure out how to run a Minecraft server almost from scratch. And that led me down this path of discovering the terminal. And then later on in IT class at high school, we were taught a little bit of like HTML and CSS. And that's really where I fell in love with coding as a problem-solving skill, because I've always loved making things. And so HTML and CSS gave me the ability to make things that I could then share with other people, which is awesome. You can just make something, put it somewhere, and then suddenly everybody in the world can click on it. That's insane. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And so I joke that basically I just have never stopped making websites since then. I just fell in love with that, and then that's really where it all started.
And then you can just take that HTML, slap a Stripe subscription onto it, and then just try to get funding. And boom, there you go.
Exactly. You just ask AI to build a game, and then suddenly your level's like, making $1 million a year. That's how easy it is. Get rich quick scheme. Buy my course.
I know, right? All right. It's funny that you mentioned levels, because we had the guy who bought Mars on last week's episode, and we were talking about that, and it's a reliable marketing source, and we were like, what? No way! But he showed us graphs that people actually were going to his site because of the game, and
That's insane.
that's like, come on, what level of
Magic
world are
internet
we
money.
in? I know, right? Anyways,
Yeah. So going back to the beginning, you got into software development. How did you first hear about React?
Oh man. Well, let me tell you about university. Because I did not graduate university. I thought I would, and so after high school, I was like, oh, I want to get into programming as a job. I really enjoyed this HTML CSS programming thing. I'm gonna go into computer. I'm gonna get a computer science degree because that's what you do to be a kind of programmer, obviously. Particularly in Austria, which is a culture where degrees are sort of very highly valued. Like people become doctors and lawyers and PhDs and whatever, mostly because they then have a doctor prefix in front of the name, and that's prestigious and a status and all that. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to go to university. And 3 months in, I realized I'm not enjoying this at all, because what I enjoy is making things. And what I'm learning at university is not teaching me how to make things any more than I'm learning by myself. In fact, kind of the opposite, it was teaching me things that don't help me make anything that I want to make. And so I was on Twitter at the time, and I saw this tweet come through where a web development agency out of London called Animate was hiring a front-end development intern. And I was like, that sounds great. I don't think they're going to hire me, but I'm just going to send in a blurb about myself and we'll see what happens. And then I'm getting that internship, much to the chagrin of my parents, because that meant that I was dropping out of university, at least for a little bit. Although to them, I framed it as, I'm just taking a break. I'll be back later. And so I got this internship in London at Animate, which is a fantastic company that I really enjoyed being at. And they basically taught me the actual practical application of HTML and CSS. And funnily enough, because I now work at Shopify, which is a Rails monolith, that was the last time I ever touched Ruby on Rails. I haven't touched it since, but they also taught me a little bit of Ruby on Rails. And then this was a 3-month internship. And so 2 months in, they taught me everything about HTML and CSS that I needed to know to really do some projects. And they were like, and JavaScript, and they were like, well, this new thing called React was just released. Do you want to go take a look at it? Because we're kind of curious about using it for some of our projects, but we don't really have anybody that we can just tell to go build something with React, because they got to deliver their actual projects. So why don't you try to build something with it and tell us how it goes? And so that's how I got into React. And so me and one of the animators that works at Animate built 2 or 3 games, funnily enough, with React, which is in hindsight kind of ironic because React's a terrible use case for games. 2015, early 2015. And so we built these 3 games with React, which ended up actually winning some awards, funnily enough. Totally different story. Which is kind of ironic. Yeah, I still find it ironic that I built games with React. That's the first thing that I ever built with React. When React is kind of terrible for games, let's be honest. It's really not a good framework for that. But I fell in love with React. Like the whole component thing made total sense to my brain. I was like, oh, I have all these things that are now co-located together, and then I don't have to keep this whole code base in my brain to make a change. I just need to know about this one component that's way easier to work with. Yeah, obviously better. I don't know what people are talking about, but I because at the time there was a lot of controversy around React, but I really like it. And so I recommended the agency use React. And then I finished that internship, and I went back to Austria. And I thought, now that I had a front-end development internship and I knew HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and React, it should be easy to get a job. And so I applied to 20, 30 jobs in Vienna, and nobody hired me. Nobody wanted to hire me. Literally nobody was interested. And so for the next, 4 or 5 months, I was basically just on a job hunt, and I went into a few contracting projects, but really I was trying to find somewhere to work as a programmer, because that's what I wanted to do. And nobody would hire me. And so by the time the next university year came around, I thought to myself, well, I'm not getting a job, so maybe I do need this degree after all. Maybe this piece of paper is actually important. And so I went back to university for the same degree that I didn't like the first time around. I don't know what I was thinking. That honestly was probably kind of not very smart intentional decision. But I went back because it's the one computer science degree that seemed somewhat interesting. And so I went back to the same degree, and I hated it as much as I hated it the first time. And then over the course of this year that I spent, or roughly, maybe 9 months that I spent trying to find a job and then going back to university, I just kept building things with React. I really enjoyed it. I really just enjoyed and I built all these small apps like sharing buttons.io and login format, all these things. Here's another fun piece of history that I don't think I've ever mentioned publicly. I think this is a true NextDev FM exclusive. Maybe I said this. I haven't said it for a long time. That's for sure. I applied to Apple back then, and they made you build a login form with React. So you had to build like a whole login flow and sign up flow with React and Redux. And they didn't end up hiring me, but I open sourced this app that did a login flow with React, and ended up getting 2,000 stars on GitHub later on when it became popular. And so I joked that I'm probably the only person in the world that's ever done a job interview that got 2,000 stars on GitHub, but then didn't get hired, which is kind of ironic. Anyways, that's a total sidetrack. And then, long story short, I'm not going really deep on the ramble. Sorry for the really long ramble, but I went back to university. I built all these apps with React. And at the time, people who have been in the React space for a long time know this. You had to manually configure Webpack every time, which was just like 1,000-line webpack.config.js file, where if one thing was even just slightly off, the whole thing fucking broke apart. It was terrible. And so I was like, every time I built these new apps, I was like, why am I setting up this Webpack shit every time? This is annoying as hell. And so I took this Webpack configuration that I really liked, that I put together that actually worked, and I just pushed it up to GitHub, and I called it React Boilerplate. And then I just kept adding to this React Boilerplate tools that I discovered that I liked, including Redux at the time, and Immutable.js and Redux Saga, and many other things that I enjoyed, CSS modules. I just use it as a place for me to sort of collect all the tools that I like. So the next time that I want to build something, I can start from that baseline rather than having to start with setup every single time. And I was in university, and we were going on our annual family skiing trip over Christmas. And I remember vividly the date. This was the 27th of December, 2015. I woke up in the morning, and I don't remember, but I want to say hundreds of emails from GitHub. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And so I looked at GitHub, and I was like, all these issues that were open in React Boilerplate and all these PRs that were open. And I was like, what's happening? And then I clicked through to the repo, and React Boilerplate overnight had gone from 0 to 600, 700 stars. And it kept getting more and more stars. Every time I refreshed, there would be more and more stars. And I was like, what's happening? I don't understand what's happening. And so I tweeted, there's literally a tweet of mine where I'm like, hey, React Boilerplate's getting a lot of stars. Does anybody know why? And this person responded, yeah, I know why. You're on the front page of Hacker News. And I was like, cool. What's Hacker News? Because I had no idea what that was. And so I was just on the front page of Hacker News. Some random person that picked up React Boilerplate, liked it, posted it on Hacker News. Hacker News liked it, ended up upvoting or starring the shit out of it and upvoting it. And so by the end of like 3 days later, it probably had 2,000, 3,000 stars, and I was suddenly a well-known person in the industry. And then I had a really good friend and mentor, or have a really good friend and mentor called Nick Graf, who's a big figure in the Vienna React.js ecosystem, because he ran the React Vienna meetup and is a mentor to many people in the ecosystem. And he told me to go speak at conferences, and that's really where my career started taking off.
I think I just put it in chat, but I think I might have. Is this the tweet that
you actually found the tweet? No. This is way later. This is later.
Okay. I was about to be like, that would be crazy because I was looking.
No, I almost want to try to find it though. That would be insane.
Oh wait, hold on. This is 8 years ago. Here, let me send it. Let me send it in chat. I'm screen sharing right now.
I tweeted a lot about React Boilerplate, so I'm not surprised that this is difficult to find. No, these are all just updates. No, I literally tweeted, does anybody know why it's getting a lot of stars or something like that? Like, it was literally that wording was somewhere in there. But I mean, I know the date, 27th of December, 2015. If you can scroll back that far you could probably use Twitter Advanced Search to find it, actually. If you search, I don't know that I want to do this live, but I'm definitely going to do this later.
I'm pulling up my pro account search, like the radar thing right now. You can continue on while I attempt to use my Google skills for good.
Yeah, because I think if you go like dates from December 1st, 2015 to December 31st, 2015 from MXSTBR, you'll probably be able to pull it up. I think I have to search.
Yeah, I see you thanking somebody for posting the library on Hacker News.
Man, you're faster than me.
Yeah. Drop the link here. Man, this is awesome. Just overnight, things like that can happen. Change your entire trajectory.
Yep.
Power of internet.
100%. And I always say this to people. I think, people look at my career and they go, and they go, man, this guy just got lucky. And every single time I did something, people go, it's lucky, you know? Like I got that internship and they randomly, that happened to be the time when React was released and they were interested in React. And so they were like, you should go try React. And then randomly React Boilerplate blew up on Hacker News. And then later on, many other things happened where people sort of assume that it's just luck. But the thing is, I sort of got lucky on purpose. I did a lot of things. Like even at this point when React Boilerplate blew up, I had probably made 20 to 30 open source repositories on GitHub, at least. Each one of them was something that I thought could maybe blow up, and I was trying to and I was trying to get other people to use it, and none of them did. And in fact, even now, if you look at my GitHub profile, yeah, I've made a lot of popular things, but my hit rate is like 1% or less. You know what I mean? Like I've made hundreds of repositories. Most of them, nobody's ever cared about. Nobody's ever used. Nobody's ever looked at them. Nobody's ever even attempted to use them. You know? But because I made that many, I had the chance for one of them to blow up under air quotes randomly. And the truth is, yeah, I got lucky in my career. And if I hadn't gotten lucky in this specific way with React Boilerplate and Hacker News, I would have gotten lucky in some other way, I'm sure. You know, my specific career, yes, was some part of chance. But the actual truth is, I would have had a great career no matter what. It would have been maybe slightly different. I would have been maybe working on different things. But ultimately, I have no doubt that I would have been lucky in another way too, because I just gave myself all of these chances to become lucky.
It's because it's the consistency that you did. And this leads me into my next question. But before I get there, it's you kept pushing out OSS tools and different things and stuff like that. And if you only pushed out like 3 or 4 of them, you probably weren't going to get hit because, I mean, I don't know physics that well, but it's like a scatter plot. And I know if you hit one, then the likelihood, if you have more, your likelihood of you getting selected is higher chances. And that's probably a horrible physics take. But anyways, leading into my question, so you made all these OSS repositories, open source repositories. Did you make them just because you found them helpful as your own tools, or like you're like, all right, I'm going to make this OSS repository because I'm going to help this niche or something like that?
No, I was always solving my own problem. I joke that I'm lazy because I work fucking hard, and I enjoy working hard. But I joke that I'm the hardest lazy guy ever, the hardest working lazy person ever, because I am extremely lazy. I hate solving the same problem twice. That frustrates the never-ending shit out of me. Like, why would I solve the same? That's uninteresting. You know what I mean? Like, I want to solve novel problems, new problems, interesting problems. And so when I kept having to solve this Webpack problem, I was like, why am I doing this over and over? That doesn't make any sense. Why? Let me just push this up to GitHub, you know? And so, or like sharing buttons.io, which is another open source project that I made very early on. I was like, why do I keep, like, I had to keep adding these sharing buttons to these websites that people made me build. And every single time you have to look up the exact syntax for how to do it on Facebook versus Instagram, and then you have to style it, and they have the correct link and UTM and all this shit. And I was like, no, I'm just going to create a generator React web app where you just input the URL and you get the sharing button HTML and you're good to go, you know? It's like, I was always solving my own problems with these open source projects. That's really where they started. And I think that's a big part of the reason why, you know, I should say, in the startup world, now looking back 10 years later, this is common advice. The advice that YC, for example, gives is solve your own problem, because then you have a much higher chance of actually solving something that other people need too, because there's probably more people like you, potentially. And you still have to go talk to the user and you have to go figure it out. But if you're the user, then you know what's good and what's bad because you're the one that wants to use it. Whereas if you're trying to make something for other people, it's much harder. And so I just ended up randomly doing that because of the kind of person that I am.
Right. Yeah. And it makes you even more passionate about the product. And I found the tweet, so I'll bring that up right now. But it makes you even more passionate about a product if you're using it every single day and you're actively refining it. And I'm the exact same way, where I don't have a lot of tools and stuff like that, but the ones I do are damn well fine-tuned. Like I was talking to you earlier about the 3D printing. I have an entire 3D printing dashboard that I use to manage and control all my printers. It's out on GitHub. It hasn't blown up. I don't want it to blow up because then that means other people are going to take my stuff. Nobody take my stuff. But I've fine-tuned it and refined it so that way everything that it does, I expect it to work perfectly, and it does because I'm the user. And it's actually funny. Someone else did have that problem. I showed them the software. They said, wait, so I just have to one-click install this and then it will auto-detect all my printers and stuff like that? I'm like, yep. And they're like, someone built this? And I was like, yeah. So I'm a big believer in solving your own problem, especially if you're dedicated. But I pulled up the tweet here. Can someone please tell me what happened overnight? I wake up to my boilerplate having 500 stars. Oh, boy. That is 2015.
And then, unfortunately, the reply was deleted, but the reply was this person replying, yeah, it's on the front page of Hacker News.
Wow, that's super cool. That's just awesome. That's great.
It's a fun time. I will say, I think, in to pull it forward a little bit, in the age of AI, this kind of personal software is going to become a lot more prevalent because now everybody can write software. The amount of tools that I write, I literally just created a quick script with Cursor where I just agent moded it, like YOLO agent moded it, that for my teams pulls all the PRs that they've merged and then creates prompts AI to create a changelog out of them for other stakeholders in the organization, so that I don't have to keep monitoring the PRs and then put it together and all this stuff. And I'm like, the script took me 5 minutes to write. It's maybe 500 lines of code. It would have taken me, an hour or two to write. Now it takes me 5 minutes to write because I just cursor agent mode it. It fucking YOLOs it anyway. I don't even have to do anything anymore. I just tell it what I want and it makes it happen. It's crazy. It's completely insane.
Code it. You just stand right there. Just let me think about how it is. But yeah,
literally. So I think there's going to be a lot more coming like that, where people build just their own little tools. And the other part of that too is like philosophically or maybe even practically, building generic software is really hard. The difference between sort of building software that works for your specific use case versus building software that works for every possible use case is not just like half more effort or twice the effort. It's probably 10 to 100 times the effort. For Shopify to make Shopify in a way that works for all merchants, even the initial version that Toby built, like, has to be 10 times to 100 times more complicated than just building one store that works. Do you know what I'm saying? And so in the age of AI, people being able to build their own software actually means that a lot more software will get created, because it's much easier to build software for just yourself versus build software for everybody. Like, for example, at Shopify, it turns out GitHub's API has a really strong rate limit. Like, you can't use the search API all that much, which is what I use to access the PRs. And so you have to cache the PRs locally. So I literally just write to a file on my local machine, and then I push it up to GitHub repository so that it's stored. And then I just go through the file system and pass all the PR data to an AI. And it's like, for me to actually ship this as a SaaS app that other people can use would be like, now I would have to set up a database and then store the PR data in there and cache it in there and then sync it every time and then make sure that it's all up to date all the time and do all this extra work that I actually don't have to do because it's just my own use. It's just on my own machine. Like, I actually don't have to do that. You know what I mean? And so the effort for me to turn this into, never mind, then you have to talk about user authentication and building and whatever other shit that you have to do to actually build a production ready app. And so that's a really interesting evolution that I'm thinking a lot about, because I end up creating a lot of tools for myself right now.
That's crazy. You should mention the changelog generation as the problem you solved recently, because I just the other day decided out of the blue to build a thing to do that. I just linked it in chat. I call it Chronicler, which is essentially like a SaaS that generates changelogs based on the range of commit hashes or PRs or release tags.
I'm going to steal your prompt.
Yeah, please do. I don't think I've spent a lot of time on the prompt, to be perfectly honest. I ended up building out auth and database and everything, etc. But I think it's getting okay results. You can try it out. It's deployed.
I'll try it out. That's the other thing. Oh, that's the other thing I should mention. You know, the interesting the other part to this is that at a company like Shopify, which has, we have thousands of employees, and we're a public company that powers, I think the latest public stat is more than 10% of e-commerce in the US. There's a lot of money and a lot of people using Shopify. I think the latest public stat was 800 million people bought something on a Shopify store last year. That's a lot of people. And so that even, and if you think about it, I don't know what the latest statistic is, but like something like 6 billion people are connected to the internet. So 1 of 6 people that are on the internet, that's like the possible market, but literally bought something in a Shopify store last year, which is crazy. And the reason I say this is because at companies like this, of which there's a lot of them, and they generally pay a lot of money for software, it's actually really hard to buy software because the security requirements are insane. Like, for Shopify to buy a piece of software, I love your app, Goose, and there's no way we could use it, just because it would take me a year to go through the procurement process, and then the security team would be like, why don't you just do it yourself? This is like, don't pay for this. Just go do it yourself. We don't know who this guy is. We don't know where the data is stored. We need to analyze, SOC 2 and all this stuff. And so it's actually, at large companies, even more so, much easier for people to make their own software than to buy software. Because by me making software, I'm just on my local machine. I'm just accessing the GitHub API with my own personal access token, and I'm just storing the data on my own work machine that anyway Shopify secures. And then I'm just running an AI that Shopify provides an AI proxy internally, and so I'm just running AI against it that Shopify approves of, and then I get my results. You know, I don't have to go through security, I don't have to go through procurement, I don't have to do any of that because I'm not buying anything. I'm not engaging with an external vendor. It's all just locally. And so there's something to that world in the AI age, or whatever you want to call it, where a lot more software is going to get made, and part of that is a lot more personal software, and part of that is also just the argument for build versus buy just got way weaker because it became much easier to build something than to buy something by like a large margin. Sorry, that was a random side note ramble there.
Yeah, no, this is actually an excellent point. But what if the thing you want to integrate in your company is open source project? Then it's a bit different, right, of a story.
It can be, and then again, there it depends on where the data is stored. If you can actually self-host it, but then the other problem is too. So then here's the other thing about working at a really large company like Shopify. Even which services are created is managed internally, right? I can't even go to GitHub and just click new repository. I have to go through an internal tool called Services Internal to create a new service. So that, because otherwise what ends up happening is all these people create all these random GitHub repositories that do all these random things. The security team doesn't know about them. And then one of them eventually leaks some API key and it creates a huge incident, right? And so they have to manage everything. And it's not restricted necessarily. There's just internal paths for getting things done, right? If you want to create a GitHub repository, you got to go to this internal tool so that they know who owns this tool and they can track who the repository is by and whatever else.
And I don't think that's bad either, because like with
Totally.
smaller companies and stuff like that, the circle is a lot smaller. You can be like, hey man, I'm making this new repo, I'm pushing this, yada 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 yada. But with larger companies, I totally get that, because it's funny you mentioned like the new repository. My dad is a computer programmer for a big mortgage bank, and he said that for some of his like changes and stuff like that to get like approved and pushed to production, he has to go through nearly like 4 to 5 weeks of like meetings and approvals for like 4 to 5 lines of code in like Rex and COBOL and stuff like that. And like he can't, and for what I can go into, it's like he can't create stuff without getting verifications from 9 different other people, and none of those 9 people are ever working during the same time. So it takes forever. But I don't think that's a bad thing either, even though it's a massive inconvenience. It sucks, but it's also an additional level of security where you have that peace of mind knowing, okay, so the new intern isn't going to break prod on his first day by accidentally pushing all of our Stripe publish keys right like that. So I don't think it's bad, but it's definitely a hassle, and I can relate to that.
I'm curious, Max, as somebody who came out of open source software, like you made a lot of open source projects, and you're probably used to maybe working by yourself and working async fashion, working in smaller scale groups. Working at a large company like that, how's it been? Was there an adjustment period? Was there like any discomfort in adjusting to the dynamics of such big groups?
I was really worried about that. I like moving fast. I like shipping things. I like working hard. And so the prospect of running an org with many people who might or might not think that way, in a large organization where there's not suddenly other stakeholders that can tell me what to do, was one that certainly I was worried about. Worried is too strong of a word. I was thinking about. Shopify was the right fit for Stellate to be acquired by. And there's a whole other story that I can talk about why I ended up going for an acquisition. But Shopify acqui-hired me and the engineering team and our technical writer, and it was the best choice and the best fit, I thought, but there was still risk there that it wouldn't work out. And I joined Shopify, and literally a month in, I looked at my wife Sue, and sorry, my wife Sue looked at me, and she said, "Wow, I think you're really enjoying this much more than we hoped you would." I'm really loving it at Shopify because Shopify's whole philosophy is very aligned with mine, which is get shit done. That's literally what our project management system is called, get shit done. It's all about moving and shipping things. And yes, there's more process and there's more alignment and there's more stakeholders and some of these stuff. But ultimately, I have 70 great people in my group who really care about this thing that we're working on, Liquid Storefronts, and making it better for our merchants. And we are shipping, and it feels awesome because everything we do touches so many people. I cannot tell you, like, the impact we have on the world is intense. I can guarantee you that by the end of this year, you will have bought something on a store that's built with something that we made. That's crazy. You know what I mean? Like, the impact and the scale of Shopify is just incredible. And the fact that it still feels like a small company where there's so much uncharted territory, where there's so many interesting problems to solve, and then every single problem you solve is just eaten up by such a large market is I'm really excited to be here. I'm glad we ended up at Shopify, and I feel very fortunate to be here.
That's very cool. You have built companies before that also. I believe it is called Spectrum, the one that sort of grew into GitHub discussions. I've seen it back in the day. When I looked at it, I just thought it was of it as a clone of Gitter. Was my evaluation correct?
Semi-correct. The big difference was that Gitter was this. So again, solve your own problems. Why did I even care to build Spectrum with my two co-founders? Although my two co-founders built the first version. The reason I joined them on this quest of building Spectrum was because I had made all these open source projects, and we were using literally Gitter for the conversations around these open source projects. But at this point, I'd made style components, and literally hundreds of thousands of developers were using it, and they all had questions about it. They all were like trying to figure out how to best use it, how to combine it, they were running into bugs, they were asking questions, and I was the only person answering all these things. And so I was like, that's ridiculous. And so I set up a Gitter community. But the problem was Gitter was like, it was a single chat thread with all these people in it, and none of it was search indexed. So we kept getting the same questions over and over and over and over and over, because people would Google first, but the answer wouldn't come up. And so then they would go to Gitter and they would ask the question. And I'd be like, yeah, we just answered this question 2 weeks ago. And that was ridiculous. And so Gitter didn't scale for the purposes that I had. And so when I met Brian and Bryn and they showed me what they built in Spectrum, I was like, oh yeah, shit, we need to do this. Because the big difference with Spectrum was it was thread based. It was basically like a forum, but with real-time chat as the comments. And so you had the same interactivity experience as with Gitter, where things would pop in real time and you could chat with people. But it was grouped into threads that were publicly search indexed, so they were findable on Google. And so when we moved all the communities over there, the duplicate questions went away, because now you could actually find the content on Google again when you searched for it. And so that's where Spectrum came from, and sort of the differentiation with Gitter. And also why later it ended up turning into GitHub discussions, although I actually wasn't involved in that project. I don't want to take credit for that.
Cool. So what was in that whole acquisition by GitHub? I know you said you weren't directly related in that, but did you have any part in that? How did that change things?
GitHub acquired us and wanted to integrate some version of what we had built into GitHub. And we did a bunch of explorations. Well, first we made Spectrum better, and then we did a bunch of iterations around what would it look like to bring this real-time forum into GitHub, and eventually decided to build GitHub discussions on every repository, which I'm sure many of you have used, where basically you can just talk about things that aren't issues, because at the time there were only issues. But a discussion about a project or a question about how to use it is not an issue. You don't this the wrong word, the wrong kind of format. And so that team ended up making. I left GitHub at that point, but that team ended up making GitHub discussions, and they're really great. The reason I left is because they weren't real time, which is really what I cared about. I wanted to make something real time on GitHub, and I always felt like GitHub had underutilized its social graph. If you think about like Facebook at the time, Twitter at the time, LinkedIn, they all do really well at leveraging their social graph. When was the last time you used a social feature on GitHub? Never, right? And so there was a lot of opportunity there to use. I don't know how many users GitHub had at the time, but many millions, I think 100 million maybe, to use that social graph to do something really interesting in real time. And it just never panned out. And so that's why I left, because that was really the piece that I was most interested in. GitHub discussions is a totally fine product for what it's worth. It totally solves the problem, but it wasn't what I was excited about.
So after you left GitHub, you joined Gatsby, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? So what drew you to that project? Like, what was there something that you saw in it that you were like, hey, I could really make this better? Or what was your experience with that?
Gatsby was interesting because they hired me on a team that included a bunch of people that I really respected that had done some very interesting things in the React space, including theme UI and system UI. And basically we were like the future-facing R&D team, and our job was to explore what could it be like for Gatsby to have a visual editor that would allow marketing teams to edit Gatsby sites and to allow other kinds of non-technical stakeholders to edit Gatsby sites, because that was one of the big downsides of moving to Gatsby for a lot of organizations. Is they previously built their website on something like Wix or Squarespace or whatever, where the marketing team would just go in, click add a new page, and then quickly drag together a couple of rectangles, and then you would have a new page, and the marketing team would have their campaign, and blah blah blah. And now you move to Gatsby, and now suddenly what do? Now suddenly you want to get a new marketing page up. Now you have to go talk to your developer. They have to go talk to the designer. They have to design the page, and then you have to build the whole thing. Then Webpack doesn't update, so then now everything breaks and whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like all this shit that you have to deal with that you didn't want to deal with as a marketing person or whatever other non-technical stakeholder that wanted to edit the website. And so we were exploring this really interesting space of, could you visually edit React apps and then while staying in sync with the code? And so we built this thing called Blocks UI, which was a Webpack plugin that would inject certain things into your Gatsby app, and you could then literally visually in your React app drag and drop components around, and it would write that change back into the code via AST transformation. And it works, and it's still, if you go to blocks.ui.com, I think, or whatever the domain was, I don't know if anybody's still paying for that domain, but it works. It totally worked. You could totally do it, and it was never a very good experience. We worked on that for like a year and a half. I think some of my team members had worked on it already before then, and just it's really difficult to make work well. It's not a super trivial thing to build, and it was really, it just became not very clearly. I don't want to say that it's impossible, because there's a lot of teams now that are trying to do it with AI, and I think now it might actually be possible with AI. But at the time, making this work is just, it's a gnarly problem to make arbitrary visual changes to a React app and then sync those changes back to code. It sounds really simple, but around every single turn just became harder and harder and harder and harder. And so it unfortunately didn't work out, but it was a really interesting space to explore for a year and a half. And then I was itching to go back to my own startup.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think the reason why React has been so widely adopted, right, is because of the developer experience, right? And circumventing it to make it work for end users who are not so technical, drag and drop, etc. I can see a lot of ways in which this can go wrong. Curious though, going back to your exit with Spectrum, what would you have done differently now that you look back at it? That's a tough one, huh?
I mean, there's some tactical tech choices that I regret. Like we definitely didn't, or I definitely didn't make all the right choices on the technical side at the time. But really, I don't really would. If I could do it again, I would do it different. But if I were to go back in time, I probably wouldn't, because I learned a ton from that experience. I'd never built a company before. I'd never had co-founders before. I'd never built with a lot of the technologies that I ended up using. And so I learned so much from that experience that I look back on it fondly, even though the product doesn't exist anymore. And I still think, by the way, if anybody's building something like Spectrum, please tell me about it, because still need that thing. We never figured out how to make it a business, but that was, I mean, still the best possible implementation of an online community that I've ever seen. Wasn't perfect, but was pretty good. So, I don't regret anything about it. I just learned a ton from it, and that's always been, I think, that's always been my guiding star with every experience that I've had, and everything I've done is I've approached it from a perspective of, what can I learn about from this? Like how can I grow? And even when I eventually co-founded Stellate, I actually set 3 goals when I co-founded Stellate, or when I decided that I wanted to co-found another company. I wanted to grow as a human, I wanted to grow as a leader, and I wanted to build a really big business. And I definitely didn't achieve that third one with Stellate, but the first 2 I crushed. I'm a completely different human now than I was 4 years ago. And so even with Stellate, some people might look at that and go, oh, you spent 4 years building this thing that now just you got acquired by Shopify and now the guild runs the product. I'm really proud of that. I achieved 2 out of my 3 goals, and I would have loved to made it 3 out of 3, and I'm gonna try again at some point, I'm sure. But I look forward like there's nothing I would have done differently about it. And the same thing is true with Spectrum. I'd never co-founded a company. I'd never worked with Brian or Bryn, and now Brian is one of my best friends, and Bryn too. I still talk to him all the time. And we learned so much from doing that, and then from being at GitHub. I mean, I am where I am. Like, me now is a combination of all of my previous experiences, and so I wouldn't do anything differently.
Yeah. I think, yeah, I agree. I have no words. That was well put. So when you were working on Gatsby and everything like that, was that your first experience with like GraphQL, or?
So GraphQL came to be because at Spectrum, and this is the. I actually don't know if I've told this story publicly either. I might have, but this might be another NextDev exclusive. At Spectrum, we originally used Firebase, and it sucked. It was a terrible experience for what we were trying to do. We had relational data, but Firebase didn't support relational. Firestore wasn't the thing, so we had to like try to finagle relational data into this document setup because we were trying to get real time everywhere, and it was a pain. It was a mess. It didn't scale. It was really slow. Like it was a nightmare. I cannot tell you the security rules. I hope they fixed that by now. But at the time, you had to write this like JSON file with security rules, and you had to set a security rule for every single field in your entire document, and it became unmanageable. And so it was clear we cannot keep using Firebase. It's a nightmare. We want real time, but Firebase ain't it for our use case. I'm sure it's great for other use cases. And so we looked at what do we do now, and at the time GraphQL had come out a couple of years prior, and the development experience is just, and still today is significantly better than anything in the REST world. TRPC, you could argue, makes it probably is the main developer experience level competitor. TRPC is pretty good on the REST side, but GraphQL is just so much better. And so we decided to use GraphQL, and it's one of the tech choices that we made at Spectrum that paid off in dividends. We were 2 designers and 1 front-end engineer. None of us had ever built the backend before, and yet we built this backend apart from some of the database choices that worked surprisingly well. And a large part of that was just GraphQL. Like, we just had one data layer where we accessed all the data from the client, and then we just built resolvers that fetched data or edited data, and that was it. And the NextDev exclusive that I was talking about is that when GitHub, aka Microsoft, acquired us, they did this big security audit of the whole code base, because when they acquire you, they want to make sure that they're not acquiring any liability. And so they hired one of the world's most famous pen testing agencies that I'm sure they have on contract, and they told 8 of their best people to try and hack into Spectrum for a week, which is a long time for 8 people to try and hack into a system that's not that big. And I was very scared about it because, again, we were 1 front-end engineer and 2 designers building this backend that we'd never built a backend before and had really no business being in the backend business, although we learned a lot through it. And so I was really worried about the security audit because I was sure that they were going to find all these holes. And they came back and they said, there's no major security issues. We found a couple minor ones, but there's no major security issues. You built a pretty good system. And I was like, fuck yeah. And you know why? I attributed that entirely to GraphQL, because the only thing we did was in our GraphQL layer, in every single resolver, we made sure that there was an access control check. That was like, if, user is in community, then they can do this. Otherwise, they cannot, That was the only thing we did. That just every resolver has 1 access control check, and it solved all the security problems. Again, it was not a big system, so there wasn't a lot of complicated security to enforce and all that stuff. But for our basic use case, it was great. And they found some minor issues, like moderators of channels could edit the community description because the access control check wasn't quite perfect, didn't take that special edge case into consideration, whatever. They found some edge cases like that, but broadly speaking, our security was great. And that largely I attribute to GraphQL, and the developer experience of it is still, to this day, much, much better than working with any other API.
Right. So would you say that experience with GraphQL and that like amazing experience is kind of what led you into Stellate?
Yeah, for sure. I actually specifically did, because at Spectrum, again, I chose a terrible database called RethinkDB that didn't scale at all. And so there was a period of time where our servers were not literally, but figuratively on fire. Our database crashed probably 2 times a day. And so I got woken up there was probably a period of a month where I got paged every single night, had to wake up, restart our database servers to get the service back up because we were growing quickly and our database was just on fire. And I was like, yes, we need to switch out our database. I get it. But that's like a, multi-month effort to do. Like, that's not an easy thing to do. Like, it's going to every single migrated data, and then while the system's still running, and then rewrite all the queries and all this stuff. There wasn't AI at the time. Now this will be much easier. Now I would just point the AI at our database folder, be like, rewrite this in SQL, but whatever. At the time, this was much harder. And so I was like, that's painful, and I don't want to get woken up every night. So how can I solve this? Oh, we have like 95% read traffic because it's a public forum. What if I just cache our API data? Because then it doesn't hit the database in our database server, and then we can switch to the database. And so I looked around, and there wasn't the product for that, even though GraphQL had been out for a while. And so I was like, what's that? Okay, that's weird. And so I ended up building a kind of shitty GraphQL cache internally in Spectrum, which, by the way, we eventually open sourced the Spectrum code base, which is another one of our open source projects. So if you can actually look at that code, it still exists. And that code was kind of terrible, but it worked. But I was like, oh, because of the way that GraphQL has a schema and because of the way how queries work and all this stuff, you could actually build a really, really smart GraphQL cache, much smarter than for any other API, because you know what fields are exactly being requested, and you could set cache policies on each of the individual fields, and then do some smart partial query caching where you split out the parts that are non-cacheable, fetch those from the server or from the database while you return back to the client what you have in the cache, like all kinds of smart stuff. But nobody built this. And so then a couple of years later, I met my co-founder, Tim, and Tim was like, oh, I built this prototype of a GraphQL CDN. And I was like, wait, I needed that. Can we actually make this into a business? And Tim was like, yeah, I guess so. And so we made it into a business. This is not quite the true story. Tim also was trying to make it a business, but we found it still around GraphQL caching because he had that problem and I had that problem. And so we were like, we're going to solve this problem once and for all. And we did. We built a really great product. Stellate is by far the best API cache on the planet. It only works for GraphQL, but if you use GraphQL, it works amazingly. We have partial query caching. It's deployed on Fastly. It runs in milliseconds, if not nanoseconds, and it literally analyzes your whole incoming query, splits out any pieces that are uncacheable, fetches only those from the origin, streams back to the client what it has in the cache immediately, and then streams back to the client what it gets back from the origin eventually when that comes back. That sounds really simple, but actually getting that to work took us 3 years with a really smart engineering team, because there's all these edge cases that it's not an easy problem to solve, never mind how to get people to use it and how to make it easy to use and all this other stuff that we had to build around this thing. Great product. And so we ended up building it because of that exact reason, because I had this use case at Spectrum and because Tim had this use case at his last company.
And I'm going to wrap this whole thing back around to what we were first talking about. You had a problem. He had a problem. You both said, hey, we have this problem. We don't care if anyone else has this problem right now, but they probably do. Let's build a product for it. You built the product for it, and look at you now, acquired by Shopify, and over 100 billion GraphQL requests. Yeah, I think like in scene right there, that's got to be the best demonstration of you got a product, or you got a problem, he got a problem. Let's find a solution, make a solution, and boom.
Yep. That's honestly the story of my life. I'm the hardest working lazy person. Freaking hate having to solve the same problem twice. I would rather go build an open source project or a product around it rather than do it again.
Yeah, as they say, laziness is the engine of progress. It makes a lot of sense. You have to build solutions to simplify lives of others. This is how you generate value. But anyway, how did you come to an acquisition at Shopify? What was the trajectory to get there?
So early last year, I looked at Stellate and I just realized we had raised $30 million. We were 25 people at the time, and I realized the business, the market that we were in was just not big enough to build a VC-backed startup, because particularly in the current market, to get to an actual outcome for a VC-backed startup, you really need to IPO. To IPO, you need to have probably right now somewhere between $500 million and $1 billion in annual recurring revenue. That's an insane amount of annual recurring revenue. I cannot tell you, $500 million to $1 billion in ARR is insane. There's not many markets in the world that can get you to that level of revenue. And the GraphQL market sure wasn't one of that. And I also don't think that the API market is one of those, because we explored that for a while. And I also don't think the DevTools market actually is one of those. I'm sort of become very bearish on that whole space of the market, unfortunately, as much as I love building for it. I don't actually think it makes for a great VC-backed business, because the market just isn't big enough to really sustain a business of the size that you need to have in order to fulfill VC returns. And so that was just a journey that we were on, that we wanted to be on. And so I realized, hey, this is not going to work out. And so I basically had two choices. I realized I could either pivot completely. I could take the money we had left, with lots of money left. I could fire everybody, pivot completely into a different space, probably AI, because that's what the hot thing is, and try to find something else to do in the AI space. Or I could try to shut the company down. And I did not want to pivot. I was tired after 4 years of building a startup and running against every possible wall through every single valley and every single mountain. Just I was tired. I did not want to start again and do the zero from one once more. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to find a way to shut this company down. But the thing that I cared about really deeply was that I did not want to, I did not want to, or I wanted to repay the trust that my team and my customers has put in me. Other people I cared about less, but I really wanted to make sure those two groups of people were taking care of our customers, because for them, Stellate was critical infrastructure. They put us in front of their core GraphQL APIs. And if we just went away, all of their websites and apps would just go down. It would be a nightmare scenario. And for our team, because they put their livelihoods in my hand. These people believed in our vision and where we were trying to go, and they put their livelihoods and their careers in the hands of this young startup that was chaotic and all that stuff. And so I wanted to repay their trust. And how do I do that? Well, I try to find a home for the product and the team where these things can continue to exist, or where they can continue to have a great livelihood, or our customers can continue to have a great service. And so I ended up finding a home for both those things. The team is now at Shopify. They acquired the team. And then the product was acquired by an entity called The Guild, who are very popular in the GraphQL space. They made a bunch of open source projects, an agency based out of England. And they have taken over the product and they're running it. And they're doing a great job running it. And so I accomplished the goal, which is I wanted to take care of those people, and I did. And then I joined Shopify. So it's kind of funny, because after we announced the acquisition, people came to me and they asked whether I felt a sense of grief from having sold Stellate, which is understandable because I think a lot of people feel that. But the interesting thing is, actually, I had felt that 9 months earlier. I didn't feel it when we announced the acquisition, because by the time we announced the acquisition, I'd spent 9 months making these 2 deals happen, talking to all these companies, all these legal negotiations, all this shit that happens during acquisition process. I can't even tell you these things publicly, but it's insane that it even came together. But it did come together. And so by the time it actually came together, I was just relieved that it actually happened. But the actual grief happened 9 months earlier, when I sat there again, beginning of last year over Christmas, and I was like, this isn't it. Like, this is not the space that's good for the company, for the investors, for the team, for the customers. This is not where we need to be, because we're not on the trajectory that we need to be at. And we tried for a year and a half to get on a different trajectory, and we couldn't find a way. The market just wasn't there. And so that was really the hard part. But once I accepted that, then it became a question of execution. Then it was just a question of, how do I actually repay this trust that these people have put into me? How can I find a path? And then at that point, it's just hard work to try and make it happen. And then relief when it actually came together. But the grief happened much earlier.
Wow. So I am quite curious to hear how the split happened, right? Shopify got the team, Guild got the product. How did that work?
Well, genuinely speaking, there's 2 kinds of acquisitions. There's strategic acquisitions, which means people buy sort of your IP and your customers and all that stuff. And then there's team acquisitions, acqui-hires, where people just buy the team. And ultimately, the best possible outcome for the team, I thought, was to be at Shopify, because it was the best culturally aligned with the kind of company that we built at Stellate. And I thought that at Shopify, our team would have would feel the most at home and would be able to have the biggest impact and would be the best fit for our team. And then the product, I wanted a company to run the product that was competent in GraphQL, because it's quite a complex product. It's not an easy thing to run or maintain or continue to develop. And so I wanted to make sure that it was run by a set of GraphQL experts. And so that's how it came together. It just ended up being those 2 companies ended up being the right fit for the product and for the team.
Awesome.
Now, those legal negotiations, though, dual acquisition, man. I basically did 2 acquisitions. That was that's why it took 9 months. Otherwise, it would have taken 5 months if it was just 1 acquisition. But I had to do it twice, which was gnarly.
Yeah, I heard some stories about M&A being, a PTSD-inducing experience for founders. What would be your advice to people who are getting into this for the first time?
Some smart people, specifically Grant Ebinger, Tiger, told me this at the beginning, and I heard the words, but I didn't emotionally internalize how true it is. Basically, going through an acquisition is like going through the most complex enterprise sale that you've ever gone through. If you've ever tried to sell to an enterprise, acquisitions are like that, but 10 times more difficult because you're actually selling yourself, not your product. And enterprises, the bar for buying vendors is significantly lower than buying a whole company. And so you end up going through this extremely complex enterprise sales process, and you sort of have to treat it like that. And you have to go broad, and you have to go talk to yourself. And I ran a very structured process. If anybody listening is considering selling their company, come talk to me about it. I'm happy to give you some advice. But it's a lot of work, and it's very complicated, and the negotiations can be gnarly, but it's figure outable. Again, it's just execution. Like, I feel very comfortable. I'm an operator. I like making things. I feel very comfortable with execution. Once I know that I want to go somewhere, then all it turns into is, what are all the small problems along the way that I have to solve? And I just solve a million problems for these acquisitions to happen. And I just tackled one of the problems after the other, after the other, after the other. The much harder part is when you don't know where to go, when you don't know what to do, then it becomes much more difficult. But once it's execution, then it's just execution. And if it works out or not, you just gotta try and work hard.
Yeah, it's just being consistent. So we're gonna wrap it all up, bring it back in, because we're reaching about time. So if you weren't in tech, because you're very passionate about tech, and just spending this hour with you, I can tell that you know what you know. But let's say in multiverse world number 305, if you weren't in tech, what would you be doing?
I'd probably be running a cult.
Yeah, so officer, he's right here.
This goes back to the coordinates. It's I don't know what I would do, but I've always had. Look, I know and understand that I'm an extraordinary person, and some part of what makes me extraordinary is just raw God-given processing power and emotional intelligence. And some other part of it is that I have some natural propensity and ability to get a group of people to move in a certain order. When I was 16, I played a game called Ingress. This is a total side note. This might be a NextDev exclusive. I don't think I've ever told the story. I used to play a game called Ingress, which was a precursor to Pokemon Go. And the difference between Pokemon Go and Ingress is that in Ingress, you weren't just playing a solo player game. You were playing a game, two factions against each other all around the world, the Resistance versus the Enlightened. And so you had a team that you had to work with in order to accomplish these goals. And I played this game a lot, and so in Vienna, I ended up running the Resistance. I was a part of the sort of leadership of the Resistance group in Vienna. I ended up running this during this event where thousands of people came to Vienna to play Ingress. I ended up running the Resistance side of things. So that was, I don't think, 300 people that I was marshaling around Vienna to try and win this event, which we did end up winning, by the way. And I was 16 at the time, marshaling around these much older people that were playing this game. But I've always had a natural propensity for leading groups of people and getting them to move in a common direction as fast as they can. And so that's why I joked that I would probably create a cult. I don't think I would actually create a cult, but there's certainly something to my role. Yes, I'm an engineer. Yes, I like making things. Yes, I like building things. But much more so now, I know how to get people to make good things at scale really, really quickly, much more so than other people do. And I think that's really the unique skill. And so if there was a multiverse component to this, and I wasn't an engineer, I wasn't a software engineer, I wasn't a programmer, that wasn't a thing, I would still be leading groups of people to make things. And that could be a cult if I was a bad guy in that multiverse, or it could be something else. But that's for sure the path that life has in store for me.
That's great. Yeah. That's
No, that's awesome. I can clearly see you're a natural leader, Max. How does it feel? I understand you have some past in video games, right? You've spent probably quite a bit of time in video games. How do you balance that nowadays? Do you play at all?
Yeah, I have 2 kids, and so I actually play with the kids. We play a bunch of Minecraft, Super Smash, Mario Kart, all the classics. That's why I have a Minecraft server now that I pay for. That's really all I get to play nowadays. I play a little bit of Fortnite with my wife, but not very much. It's sort of it's too stressful, honestly. Like, because with kids you can really only play after bedtime, but then I work East Coast hours, but I live on Pacific time, so I get up at like 5:40 every day, 5:30 every day, and then that means I have to go to bed really to get enough sleep at like 9:30. So then after bedtime, bedtime's at 8. So then I have like an hour and a half to do all my things and then play around a Fortnite. But then Fortnite is so stressful. It's fun, but it like my cortisol rush is so intense that then I can't fall asleep and then I have a shitty next day. And so it's like a weekend activity that we get to do
the
sometimes.
sweaty hands too when you're like top 10 and stuff, and like I'll play with my girlfriend sometimes. We're both like bent over on the couch, just eyes glued to the split screen, being like, okay, don't mess this up.
It's so stressful.
All right. Another completely unrelated question. What do you think is a tech trend right now that is overrated?
Say that again. What is one what that's overrated?
Tech trend that is overrated right now.
And you can't say AI because we got a follow-up question on that.
What is one tech trend that's overrated?
Okay, you can say AI, but you just can't. You got to elaborate why.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very bullish on AI. I actually feel like all of tech is kind of overrated at this point, because in truth, I think what's going to happen is so AI raises the level of abstraction that we operate at to describing intent, and then the machine figures out how to implement that intent. And so if you think about that from an engineering perspective, I think the world where we're going to end up is basically humans write end-to-end test fixtures, but not even the code. They just write the name of the test. They're like, user clicks on this button and then it does this thing and then that. And then the AI writes the end-to-end test and then writes the implementation, then runs the end-to-end test to verify that the implementation actually completes the end-to-end test. And then you end up actually being in a system where you're just describing intent and the AI creates everything else. I think that's a possible outcome. I think it requires a lot of work on the AI side to make that actually happen. But if you extrapolate the current curve of AI growth, that's probably where we end up. You just describe intent and the AI makes it happen.
Wait,
and the way you do that is...
You guys are writing tests? What's a test? I don't know what a test is. I kind of
you just get your levels, YOLO.
I just vibe code. I don't know what
100%.
Git is either. I just kind of let
100%.
Cursor manage all of the checkpoints, and then I just push everything to a VPS.
Agreed. And all of this leads me to say that tech choices basically don't... In that world, tech choices are irrelevant. Almost.
Well,
it's not entirely true.
Arguably, because if technology is not widely used and is not available in the LLM dataset that was used for training, then LLM would not be able to support you.
Unless we have AGI, then
Right.
then it doesn't matter, because then they can learn the technology as fast, if not faster than we could. I don't know that that's a likely outcome. I think it's a possible outcome. And I think in that world, the thing is, everybody keeps talking about Next.js versus TanStack versus whatever, or Rails versus now this whole Go versus Rust versus. And the truth is, you can just tell the AI to write the thing in whatever fucking language it wants. It doesn't
COBOL.
matter.
You can't do COBOL. I take a COBOL class right now, and I do a lot of mainframe stuff for my current college classes. That has been the ultimate test of my actual code understanding, because I'm like, hey, can you write this function? And it just hallucinates, and I'm like, I actually have to do this. Why? Why are my classes working?
That's hilarious.
But for everything else, yes, it basically knows any popular language. We talked about this with Ben Davis, who's a SvelteKit advocate. There's not a bunch of training data with that, but for the big languages and the big libraries, it can basically do anything you want it to do, and you just have to ask. I think that's because I used to, because I manage like 5 or 6 different websites for a bunch of clients, and I did the stupid indie tech developer thing where I saw a new framework and I'm like, oh, I gotta move everything over to this. And then I realized that I had like 9 different frameworks and 3 different versions of each framework deployed across like 12 or 11 sites. And A, I wasn't learning any of them completely. And B, the AIs couldn't help because it was like bleeding edge new versions. So I just finally decided to like convert everything back down to like a Next 15.3, which is it, or like 14 something. And is it the bleeding edge? No, but it just enables me to have like that extra 9 programmers of cursor agents running around and kind of building everything. And I'll lead into our final wrap-up question with that. Do you think, because you're bullish on AI, do you think AI is going to replace developers in the sense of that they will all be jobless? Or do you think it's just going to, like you said, have that extra layer of abstraction and then all developers are just going to become like vibe engineers?
Neither. I think every single revolution that the human race has gone through, like if you think about the Industrial Revolution, the machines replaced all of these humans. All these humans, they were totally useless from today to tomorrow almost. It was almost like AI. Like there was millions, basically every job except for a few became obsolete overnight because now suddenly you could have a machine that could do the job better than you ever could. And yet, all of those people still have jobs. All those people were still working on things. All of these people were still necessary to solve problems, right? And so I think, yes, I think that the role that developers play is going to be very different. The tactical things we do every day is going to be very different. But ultimately, what all engineers are just problem solvers. We just fucking love solving problems iteratively. And we love, and actually, my mom still doesn't quite understand this, I think, because she's a doctor. And doctors spend 99% of the time diagnosing the problem, and then they make one change. And if it doesn't work, that's a really big problem, right? Engineers, software engineers especially, we're totally different. We just fucking try something, see if it works. Doesn't work. Cool, we'll just try it again. Okay, cool, it doesn't work. Cool, we try it again. Oh, now it works. Okay, cool, now we have a different problem. Okay, cool, now we try again. And that's the exact way that AI works, right? And so I actually think that the way our brains are set up at a much higher level, I don't know that we'll be coding or writing code for very long, but at a much higher level, our brains are set up to very quickly and intuitively solve problems. And that skill is always going to be necessary, even if we have AI, even if AI solves a lot of the problems for us. You still have to instruct it and you still have to tell it which problems to solve and how to solve it and whether the problem is actually solved and how to solve the problem, iterate and do all these things. I don't think that's going away ever. And so I think, yes, we might not be coding every day anymore, but the way developer brains work is going to continue to be valuable no matter what.
Awesome. I promise, Pinky promise, final question on top of that. Since a lot of people have been attributing the advancements in natural language processing, AI, as sort of a major factor in why it's a lot harder to get a job in tech right now, what would be your advice to people who are just graduating with computer science degrees or people who are just looking to get started, start a career in this industry?
Man, so Shopify is hiring 1,000 interns this year. Our total engineering capacity is like 3,000, I think. So a fourth of our engineering capacity is going to be interns this year. Why? Because it turns out you can take an intern, and if they're AI native and they're hungry and they want to learn and they want to just get shit done, if you give them AI and they learn AI, they can be extremely effective. And so actually, it's the very opposite. I think the people who are being left behind are the people who cannot keep up. I think if you are keeping up with the advancements in AI and you're an AI native, as Farhan, our VP of engineering, calls it, a centaur, an AI enhanced human, you will vastly outperform people who are unwilling to change and adapt to the current environment of AI. And so I actually think you have a huge leg up. And so if you're in university, if you're brand new to the space, if you're just now learning, go figure out how to be really productive with AI. You're a hot commodity all of a sudden, even though you don't have a lot of experience. Also, go apply to Shopify as an intern. We would love to have you.
Link right here. Click the QR code on my hand. But yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think if I could add one more thing, just do it. Don't think about doing it. Just do it. Because you're not going to get any worse off where you are if you don't do anything. And as me being in college, I have extreme knowledge of that right now because a lot of my friends, they're like, bro, the CS job market is cooked. Absolutely cooked. I'm like, yeah. You know why? Because you've applied to 10 companies. Your GitHub is empty. There's nothing. You got to get out there. You got to get notice. And you got to be consistent. Literally this is a perfect wrap up to the initial thing. You got to be consistent. And if you get consistent, you'll get noticed on one thing. And if you get noticed on one thing, then that opportunity will present itself and that will lead to another opportunity. And it only is going to fail if you fail and you stop trying. But if you fail and then try again and try again and try again and try again, you're going to succeed at one point. Like I think it's physically impossible for you to fail an infinite amount of times and not be successful, because I felt like that sometimes when I was in my like my freshman year. I was like, man, because I'm in my junior, but possibly senior, because I was looking at my degree evaluation and they were like, oh, you only have 2 more classes left. And I'm like, what? I thought I was going to be here for another year. But anyways, I was looking at that and I was like, man, I have so much ahead of me and I don't even know what to do. And like that overwhelming sort of thing of like, oh no, what do I do? But then I just decided one day, I was like, you know what? I'm going to stop thinking about it. And I'm just going to start shipping. I'm going to start creating, cultivating, designing, making connections. And I mean, I'm not bad off. Not bad off. So yeah, I agree. All right. So Max, it was an absolute joy and pleasure to have you on today. I think we had a great discussion, and yeah, just thank you for coming on and joining us. It was great.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
This
you.
was fun. Thanks for the great questions.
Of course.
All
I'm
right.
good at that. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining in for NextDev. Be sure to join in next week. We have a very special guest that we'll be announcing on Monday. And
Not as special as this one.
Exactly. He knows his worth. They're special in their own ways. But no, really a massive thank you, Max. And I'm still very envious of your background because it looks so cool with the glowing. And I'm gonna have to find something that glows in my background because that just looks too cool. I'm just gonna have to grab something like that. But thank you. All right, guys. This is Ryan signing out.